Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, May 12th, 2025. All right, first thing, we had some good news over the weekend that India and Pakistan agreed to a ceasefire. So we'll get to that later on in the show, but I just wanted to mention it. And it looks like the U.S. played a mediating role in that. Some other countries did as well, but it looks like India and Pakistan have backed down from the brink. It was looking a little shaky, the ceasefire at first, but on Sunday it seemed like everything was holding. So again, we'll get into that. But the first story today at the top of antiwar.com, Hamas says that it will release a U.S.-Israeli captive. So Hamas said on Sunday that it would release Gazan Alexander, a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen and IDF soldier who was captured during the October 7th attack. And Hamas confirmed that it had been in direct talks with the U.S. on a potential Gaza ceasefire deal and the entry of humanitarian aid into the Palestinian territory. So this is Dr. Khalil al-Hayya. He's a Hamas official. He said, quote, as part of the efforts being made by our mediator brothers to achieve a ceasefire, Hamas has been in contact with the U.S. administration over the past few days. The movement has expressed a high degree of positivity, and the release of Israeli soldier Gazan Alexander, a dual U.S. citizen, will be part of the steps being taken to achieve a ceasefire, open the crossings, and allow aid and relief to reach our people in the Gaza Strip, end quote. So according to Axios, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff spoke with Alexander's parents and told them that he should be released soon. And then Israeli media reported that Hamas is expected to release him at noon on Monday. So this is pretty big, unexpected news that came out on Sunday. And President Trump confirmed the deal in a statement on Truth Social. He said, quote, hopefully this is the first of those final steps necessary to end this brutal conflict. I look very much forward to that day of celebration, end quote. In the post, Trump thanked Egypt and Qatar. He made no mention of Israel. According to the latest Israeli media reports, Israel was not aware of this deal until it was announced. The office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Hamas would release Alexander without any compensation or conditions as a gesture of goodwill toward the U.S. Netanyahu's office said, quote, the U.S. conveyed to Israel that this move is expected to lead to negotiations for the release of additional hostages based on the original Witkoff framework, which Israel had already accepted, end quote. So the Witkoff framework that Israel is referring to there appears to be the temporary ceasefire deal that they tried to get Hamas to agree to after breaking the original deal that would have led to the full the releasing of all the Israeli captives and the full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. So it's not clear exactly what chance any negotiations have for a deal on top of this, a deal between Israel and Hamas. But I think this is a pretty big deal that the U.S. has gone ahead with this. And, you know, the news of this deal between the U.S. and Hamas, it comes amid all these reports. I mean, over the weekend, there was from Israeli media, from U.S. media, from Arab media, all these reports about Trump being frustrated with Netanyahu and going in his own direction. And at first, I kind of, I'm always skeptical of things like that because throughout the Biden administration, we had these reports that he was so mad at Netanyahu, but he continued to give Israel, whatever it wanted. But with Trump here, we have seen some things happen, like the ceasefire with the Houthis in Yemen. And over the weekend, they continued their attacks on Israel. And another thing that I think is believable, which I covered in the last show, is the idea of Trump going through with a deal with the Saudis, dropping the condition that they normalize with Israel, because it's just not going to happen. But Trump wants, he wants some kind of big deal with the Saudis, it looks like. So I think that is believable. And then, so there's reports saying that Trump doesn't want Israel to go ahead with this big escalation of its assault because essentially the plan is to completely level Gaza. And according to NBC News, Trump's not happy because it could get in the way of his plan for the U.S. to be involved in rebuilding and taking over Gaza and everything. So not exactly for the right reasons. But what I haven't seen in all these reports, and I might have missed something, but I have not seen anything say that Trump is threatening to withhold military aid to Israel, or that he's threatening to stop supporting the onslaught, the bombardment of Gaza. What it sounds like is he's basically saying, I'm going to go my own way with these other things, and that includes a potential deal with Iran, deal with the Saudis, the situation in Yemen. But I haven't seen any indication that he's saying, we're going to stop, end the military aid if you keep going. And I don't see any real pressure to lift the blockade on Gaza as people are starving. But something is happening, and I do think getting this Edon Alexander guy out of Gaza, I think it's going to really hurt Netanyahu domestically, maybe put more pressure on him to just agree to a deal. And then the other reports say is that the U.S. is saying that it dropped its demand that Hamas must disarm. It seems like the U.S. is willing to live with Hamas existing in some capacity. So I think this could really change things and maybe again put pressure on Netanyahu domestically to end this, because if they go ahead with this escalation that they're planning, I mean, it's just going to get worse and worse for the civilians in Gaza. I mean, that's a simple way of putting it. But anyway, so with all those reports going on, unfortunately, throughout the weekend, Israel continued to starve and kill Palestinians in Gaza. So the next story here, Israeli strikes on Gaza kill 68 Palestinians over 3 days. So Israeli attacks on Gaza killed at least 68 Palestinians and wounded 290 over the past 3 days. I should have given you a warning. The picture here is very sad. It's of 2 children who were killed by Israeli airstrikes. So again, over the 3 days, 68 killed. In that same time period, at least 2 bodies were recovered from the rubble of Palestinians who were killed in previous attacks. And Israeli attacks on Sunday included overnight strikes on tent camps in southern Gaza. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, the attacks on tents in Khan Yunis killed at least 10 Palestinians, including 4 children. Wafa also reported Israeli strikes in Gaza City and said one attack killed a father and his daughter. Israeli shelling in Jabalia, northern Gaza, killed a child. And an Israeli drone strike hit central Gaza's Deir el-Bala, killing 6 people. The latest violence in Gaza comes 70 days into the total Israeli blockade, which has prevented the entry of food, fuel, and all other goods, pushing Gaza's civilian population into starvation. And this has caused the closure of community kitchens, bakeries, other aid operations. People are just have nothing. And the next one here, this gets into this aid scheme that the U.S. and Israel have worked out. Or not have worked out, but have this plan they've cooked up. So UN agencies condemn U.S.-Israeli plan to use aid as bait. So the UN aid agencies have condemned a U.S.-Israeli plan to use aid as bait to forcibly displace Palestinians into a small area of southern Gaza. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee unveiled the plan on Friday, although there's no clear timeline when they might do this, and Gaza remains under a total Israeli blockade. Huckabee said that the effort will be headed by a newly formed private foundation, and the aid distribution will be carried out by private U.S. security contractors. He said 4 aid distribution sites would be established and admitted that the program would initially only feed about 1.2 million people, or about 60% of Gaza's population. When pressed on the lack of a plan to feed the rest of the Palestinian population of Gaza, Huckabee said that it would be scaled up over time. An Israeli official speaking to the Times of Israel said that Israel hoped other countries would begin taking in Palestinians to minimize the need for aid. So this official is essentially saying that they're hoping the lack of food, the starvation strategy, will facilitate ethnic cleansing. We'll finally get countries to agree to accept Palestinians and force Palestinians to leave. And the Times of Israel report also said that the 4 aid distribution sites will be set up south of the Morag corridor. And that is the strip of land between Rafah and Khan Yunis. So essentially, they're trying to put all the civilians in Rafah, which is a tiny area for whatever the population is at this point. It's not exactly clear, 2 million, 1.9 million. And they want to put them all there. And so the idea is, it's very clear, and as I've been mentioning this, but that the purpose of this plan is you give them the option of either staying in northern Gaza, staying in central Gaza and starving to death, or making the trip to southern Gaza to get food. And then from there, the idea is to pressure them to leave Gaza altogether. And essentially, so under this plan for Israel to escalate the assault on Gaza, they are going to create a concentration camp in southern Gaza. That is the plan. And that's the language that, we're not just seeing this from Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister. He said the plan is to concentrate them in this small area. But the Israeli military's list of their goals, they use the word concentrate. And they're going to put them in tent camps. So it's a concentration camp is the plan here. Ethnic cleansing. And if they don't leave, kill them. So genocide and ethnic cleansing is very clearly the goal and the plan here. And Israel is apparently waiting for Trump's trip to the Middle East. So he's going there on Tuesday, May 13th. He's going to go to Saudi Arabia first. And so I think that's going to be a very crucial time to figure out how things are going to go. But anyway, so I went over all that. The UNRWA, the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency, basically called this out for what it is, them trying to use aid as bait, as they put it, to bait people down, to facilitate displacement, ethnic cleansing. And UNRWA is calling for the blockade to be completely lifted. Aid agencies are rejecting this scheme because they can see what it is. And they say, just lift the blockade and we can send the trucks in. We got the trucks ready to go. All right, so the next one here, Pope Leo XIV calls for ceasefire in Gaza. So Pope Leo XIV called for a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the Israeli blockade of aid on Sunday in his first Sunday blessing since being elected pontiff last week. He said, quote, "I am deeply pained by what is happening in Gaza. Let the fighting cease immediately. Let humanitarian aid be provided to the exhausted population, and may all hostages be released," end quote. The Pope also called for a ceasefire in Ukraine, saying, quote, "I carry in my heart the sufferings of the beloved Ukrainian people. Let everything possible be done to achieve genuine, just, and lasting peace as soon as possible," end quote. So Leo, who's the first U.S.-born pontiff, welcomed the ceasefire between India and Pakistan and made an appeal to world leaders for peace and an end to war. He said, quote, "In today's dramatic context of a third world war fought piecemeal, I too appeal to the powerful of the world by repeating these ever relevant words. Never again war," end quote. So the Pope made the remarks after singing the Regina Caeli prayer, the Queen of Heaven prayer, which is recited throughout the Easter season. He closed his address with a heartfelt appeal to Mary, the Queen of Peace, quote, "so that she may present it to the Lord Jesus and obtain for us the miracle of peace," end quote. So this shows that he is going to, well, it's a sign, this is, again, his first Sunday address. And he's making a point to call for peace in these conflict zones, Gaza and Ukraine, he mentioned. And, he said, and there's all these other conflicts. So I think it's pretty clear that he's going to continue Pope Francis's emphasis on this issue of war and peace. And Francis frequently called for peace in Gaza and was highly critical of Israel's conduct, suggesting in his last book that there should be an investigation into whether it constitutes genocide. So we'll see how Pope Leo goes on, if he becomes more, kind of critical of what Israel's doing to the Palestinians as things go on. I mean, I think, I know there's a lot of people, they were pushing for Pope Francis to go to Gaza, but obviously his health was in decline for a while. He couldn't really make that trip. But I think, like a trip to the Holy Land during everything that's happening by a pope could be very impactful and powerful. And I know Cardinal Pizzaballa, the Latin Patriarchate in the Middle East, he visited Gaza twice last year. He visited the church, the Holy Family Catholic Church, which Pope Francis called almost every night for a long time. So, I think this Pope has a chance to be pretty impactful on that part of the world. All right, so the next one here, Israeli MKs don't think starving children is a bad thing. So this article is from Haaretz, the Israeli outlet. And so there was a little debate among some Knesset members about starving kids and depriving them of medical care. So Israel's Knesset held a first-of-its-kind discussion on the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. During a meeting last Thursday, Dr. Sharon Shaw from Natan, an Israeli-based organization that provides humanitarian aid around the world, made a seemingly trivial remark and said, quote, "I think that even everyone sitting around this table doesn't want a suffering child to be unable to receive painkillers or minimal medical treatment." End quote. So Israeli lawmaker Amit Halevi, a Likud party member, angrily interrupted her and said, quote, "I'm not sure you're speaking for us when you say we want to treat every child and every woman. I hope you don't stand behind that statement either. When fighting a group like this, the distinctions that exist in a normal world don't exist." End quote. So essentially the doctor said, I think we could all say we don't want to deprive women and children of basic medical care. And this woman, this Israeli lawmaker says, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're not speaking for me there. And then Shaw, the doctor, didn't back down and said, quote, "I hope that you, too, don't want a 4-year-old whose arms has been amputated to go without painkillers. I hope you have that empathy, too." End quote. And then another Israeli Knesset member, Limor Son Har Melech, from the Religious Zionism Party, could not hold back and said, quote, "The only treatment needed here is for you. You are the sickest doctor I've ever seen." End quote. And that's a response to a doctor saying you don't want a 4-year-old who needs to be amputated, who needs to have a limb amputated, to go without painkillers, right? And the response is, the only treatment needed here is for you, and that you're the sickest doctor I've ever seen. I mean, it's just really sick stuff here from members of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. All right, so the next one here, Iran says talks with the U.S. are difficult but useful. So Iran said on Sunday that the 4th round of negotiations it held with the U.S. earlier in the day were difficult but useful, and both sides have agreed to hold more talks. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Abaki said, quote, "The 4th round of indirect Iran-U.S. negotiations is concluded. Difficult but useful talks to better understand each other's positions and to find reasonable and realistic ways to address the differences. Next round will be coordinated and announced by Oman." End quote. A U.S. official told Axios that an agreement was reached on moving forward and working out the technical details of a potential nuclear deal. That official said that the U.S. is encouraged and looking forward to the next meeting. So the U.S. delegation was led by Steve Witkoff, and the Iranian side was led by Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi. According to the U.S. official speaking to Axios, negotiations were held both indirectly and directly. So it remains unclear what kind of deal, what the U.S. is exactly pushing for in these negotiations. We've seen all these public calls for Iran to eliminate its nuclear enrichment program. Iran's been very clear that they're not going to do that. Araghchi said that ahead of these talks. He said publicly, we're not going to give up our enrichment capability. So hopefully these talks continue to make progress. I mean, the threat is if there's no deal, Trump's going to bomb Iran. But I feel like the chances of a war with Iran, if things have kind of cooled down a little bit between the U.S. and Iran, I was worried there when the talks were postponed. Pete Hegseth was threatening consequences, and it seemed like the chances of war really increased again. But it seems like things have cooled down, and now another round of negotiations, and they're continuing. So that means that the U.S. is not just demanding they get rid of their enrichment program. They must be really, trying to work out a deal. This is the 4th round of negotiations. I don't think Iran would continue to entertain this if the U.S. was just saying, no enrichment and you got to get rid of your ballistic missiles, the things that like Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton are demanding. All right, so the next one here, Israel shifting to bunker-busting bombs in Lebanon strikes. So this one's from Jason Ditz. So since the ceasefire in Lebanon began in late November, Israel has carried out an enormous number of airstrikes against southern Lebanon, and the strikes have continued in recent days, but there are signs of even further escalation as bunker buster bombs are increasingly utilized. So major attacks on the outskirts of Nabatea last week reportedly included a number of such high-intensity munitions. Israeli military officials claimed the intent was to destroy Hezbollah tunnels and infrastructure in the area, though the actual existence of such sites has not been confirmed. So it looks like they're using heavier firepower, basically, in their airstrikes in Lebanon, using these bunker-busting bombs again. And this is what they used to kill Nasrallah. They dropped a whole bunch on a very buildings in a populated part of Beirut when they killed Nasrallah. Just completely destroyed the place. So we're starting to see them resort to using those types of weapons again. All right, so the next one here, 11 Alawites killed in Syria as sectarian violence continues. Another one from Jason. So sectarian violence against Syria's Alawite minority became a huge matter in early March when massacres left well over 1,300 people dead, and the ruling Hayat Tahrir al-Sham insisting the matter was over and an investigation would happen. The probe has been delayed since then, and the violence slowed but never really stopped. Over the weekend, yet more killings were reported, with at least 11 Alawites slain, according to various reports. And at least 9 civilians were reported killed on Saturday attacks in the Latakia governorate. The biggest incident happened in a village on the outskirts of Jabla, where gunmen attacked and killed a number of Alawites, including an 8th grade student. So they killed a very young child. And 2 of the slain were reportedly beheaded. So this stuff continues with very little attention. You have Ahmad al-Shara, the founder of al-Qaeda in Syria, who is now the de facto president of Syria, getting a warm welcome from Western countries. He just recently visited France. There's reports that he might be involved in a meeting with Trump in Saudi Arabia. I don't know if that's confirmed. But these sectarian killings and massacres, beheadings, continue. All right, so the next one here, Putin proposes direct talks. Zelensky wants truce. So on Sunday, Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed starting direct peace talks with Ukraine without preconditions in Turkey this Thursday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky initially responded by saying there must be a ceasefire before talks could be held. He later said that he was willing to meet with Putin in Istanbul this Thursday, but made clear it would still be conditional on a ceasefire. Zelensky wrote on X, quote, "We await a full and lasting ceasefire starting from tomorrow to provide the necessary basis for diplomacy. There is no point in prolonging the killings, and I will be waiting for Putin in Turkey on Thursday. Personally, I hope that this time the Russians will not look for excuses," end quote. So in his announcement proposing the talks, Putin said that Ukraine had rejected previous Russian ceasefire offers, including the 3-day truce that he declared for Russian Victory Day, which ended at midnight on May 11th. Throughout those 3 days, both sides accused the other of violating the ceasefire, though at least it did seem like things were toned down a bit. Putin said, quote, "I will repeat, we have proposed steps toward a ceasefire on many occasions. We have never refused to engage in dialogue with the Ukrainian side," end quote. So interestingly, Trump said that he wants Ukraine to accept Putin's offer for direct talks without a ceasefire. Trump wrote on Truth Social on Sunday, quote, "President Putin of Russia doesn't want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate a possible end to the bloodbath. Ukraine should agree to this immediately. At least they will be able to determine whether or not a deal is possible, and if it is not, European leaders and the U.S. will know where everything stands and can proceed accordingly," end quote. So despite Trump's post, Zelensky said again later in the day that he expects a ceasefire on Monday. And again, there's just no sign that that's going to happen at this point. So he could just be using that to try to avoid these talks. European leaders have been threatening to increase sanctions on Russia and ramp up military aid to Ukraine if there is not a ceasefire. If Russia doesn't agree to a 30-day ceasefire by Monday, and they reportedly have the Trump administration's support to do so, to increase sanctions. So we'll see, if there's any talks this Thursday in Turkey. I think it could be pretty pivotal whether or not the talks happen. If they don't happen, I think there's a chance that this thing just goes on and continues. So hopefully there's talks. Hopefully something changes here, because the likelihood of a peace deal does not seem very high lately. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. and China agree to trade consultation mechanism. So this article is from the South China Morning Post. So the U.S. and China trade officials have been holding these trade talks, I think in Geneva. Yeah, in Geneva. And the U.S. trade representative said on Sunday that, we reached a deal, didn't really say reveal any details of it. And then China's Vice Premier He Lifeng told reporters that they agreed to establish a trade consultation mechanism during the 2 days of talks. He said the two sides have taken an important step to resolve differences through equal dialogue and consultation, and they plan to issue a joint statement on Monday and conduct further consultations on issues of mutual concern. He pledged that China is ready to work with the U.S. to manage differences, expand areas of cooperation, and make the pie of cooperation bigger. He also warned that Beijing will not be afraid and fight to the end if the U.S. insists that, continuing the trade war. U.S. Representative Jamieson Greer, who took part in the talks with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, said that a deal was struck with China. So it sounded like, this sounds like it's not quite that a deal's been reached, but they agreed on a mechanism to kind of continue trade consultations. But it's not like a trade deal has been reached yet. All right, so the next one here, judge grants bail to Turkish national Rumeysa Ozturk. So this article's from Middle East Eye, so this is good news. Tufts University PhD student Rumeysa Ozturk was granted bail in a hearing in a federal court in Vermont on Thursday. So this was this past Thursday, a blow to the Trump administration, which has placed her into deportation proceedings. So essentially, the judge said that Ozturk, the government didn't have anything on her. The only so-called evidence that they had against her was that she wrote an op-ed, and I believe she was one of like 6 co-authors of an op-ed that was published in the school paper saying, calling for divestment from Israeli companies and to recognize the genocide in Gaza. It's really outrageous that they went after her. And I believe the judge also said that, this is something we basically already knew, that the Trump administration was getting names of people to deport from Beitar, which is this like rabid Zionist organization that essentially terrorizes people, goes around and hands them beepers, the threat being that it might explode. This is a really extreme, Zionist group that's been feeding names to the Trump administration to deport. So they're not having any wins here. The good news is the Trump administration is not having any wins in court when it comes to these deportations. So hopefully things continue to be overturned. And so she's going to fight the deportation, and she does not have to be detained. So she's been released. They're still going to try to deport her. But anyway, so the last one here, India claims that it killed 100 in last week's Pakistan strikes. So this article's from AP. So India is claiming that its military strikes in Pakistan-controlled Kashmir and Pakistan earlier this week killed more than 100 militants. So it was actually last week. Including prominent leaders, the head of India's military operations claimed Sunday. Does AP not know that Sunday is the first day of the week? Anyway, so Lieutenant General Rajiv Ghai, the Director General of Military Operations, said India's armed forces struck 9 militant infrastructure and training facilities, including sites of the Lashkar-e-Taiba group that India blames for carrying out the major militant strikes in India and the disputed region of Kashmir. So again, they're claiming that they killed all these militants. Of course, Pakistan is saying the strikes, the missile strikes on Pakistan killed just civilians. But there was some actual clashes, it looks like, along the line of control where there were Indian and Pakistani military casualties. They're both claiming like very different numbers of how many they killed or how many they lost. But anyway, so there's a ceasefire, and this is, again, great news when you have talking about two nuclear armed powers. And so as part of the ceasefire, the nuclear armed neighbors agreed to immediately stop all military action on land, in the air, and at sea. On Sunday, Pakistan's military said that it did not ask for a ceasefire, as claimed by India, but rather it was India that had sought the ceasefire. At a televised news conference, Lieutenant General Ahmad Sharif said Pakistan's armed forces targeted a total of 26 Indian military installations in response to India's missile strikes, which were launched before dawn on Wednesday. He said the military had vowed it would respond to the Indian aggression, and it has fulfilled its commitment to the nation. Sharif warned that any threat to Pakistan's sovereignty or territorial integrity would be met with a comprehensive, retributive, and decisive response. So, anyway, it looks like things are holding for now. It was declared on Saturday, and then there was some indications that it was a little shaky. There's reports of explosions, but for now everything's holding. There's some interesting reports we have in the lower part of the page about Pakistan's Chinese-made weapons, Chinese fighter jets, doing pretty well against the Indian military. That the Indian military might have faced more resistance and a harder time from Pakistan and its Chinese military equipment than it expected. But anyway, let's hope this thing holds and that they're talking and that they try to reach some sort of lasting understanding here. But anyway, that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Michelle J. Kanukan. New appeals briefs filed in USS Liberty FOIA lawsuit. One from Ted Galen Carpenter. Turkey, U.S. rogue allies territorial conquests. One from Hanin Majidil. The intolerable gap between Jewish memory and Palestinian reality. One from Ramzi Baroud. Famine in Gaza. Will we watch as Gaza starves to death? Our spotlight from Brandon Buck, U.S. airstrikes on Iran, a fool's errand, risks forever war. So please go check all that out. A lot of stuff that we went through. I'm sure I missed some other big stories from the weekend. It seems like just so much happened. Again, a lot with these reports about Trump and Israel. So we'll see what happens with this trip to the Middle East. One thing I want to mention, so I'm taking off on Tuesday. I'm taking off most of the day. I'm going to go to take a ride up to Washington, D.C., up to the belly of the beast for a reception for the Pierre Sprey Award, which is a journalism award. I won one of the awards last year, so I'm going to go to the reception this year. Two writers for 972 magazine. I believe two Palestinian journalists are winning this year. I'll have their names for you tomorrow. I got to double check that. So that means I'll be taking Tuesday off. So I'm not going to do a show that night for Wednesday. But then I'll be back the next day. It's rare that I take a day off in the middle of the week. So there'll be one less show this week, but then I'll catch you up on all the important stuff in the following show. But I'll remind everybody tomorrow at the beginning of the show for those who don't make it to the end. But anyway, that is it. You could always support the show by liking, commenting, subscribing. Follow us on social media. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.